Hello there friends, it's your boy here with another episode of All the Mods. I'm here at the canola farm, which is working swimmingly. The amount of empowered oil we're getting is still going up, so it looks like this amount of seeds is alright for the amount of oil we're actually using. But I hope it stays that way, because by the end of this episode, we're actually going to be using a lot more oil, because we're going to be using a lot more RF. So if you'll remember, we set up this ore processing a while ago, and this was kind of shoddily thrown together. It's just really basic Ender IO ore doubling. But I want to upgrade this episode. I'd like to transition to some Mekanism ore processing. And I think this episode we're going to get to 4 times, not quite quintupling. We don't have enough stuff for that or enough power for that yet. But before we can do that, we are going to need to do some good old crafting. But Mekanism stuff is pretty annoying to craft because of all the different circuits and like alloys and stuff you have to make. So I would like it if we were able to auto-craft those so we didn't have to do all that by hand. And so I'm going to do that in this wall. I'm going to turn this into sort of a little auto-crafting area, or at least a little processing area. But that means we're going to have to move out some of these doohickeys we made earlier. So I'll go ahead and move out this modular storage. And I'm just going to go ahead and put that in the floor here. Seems like as good a place as any, and I think this should still be working. It is. Perfect. And that also means we're going to have to clear out our little solder setup here, but that's not too big of a deal because Refined Storage actually got an update recently. Now the solder is a much smarter block, so instead of having to have all those conduits and filtering the inputs to make certain items go in certain slots, all we have to do is just place down a chest, and then we can just insert the items into any side, and it'll sort them automatically. It'll put them in the correct slot. Now I could place these crafters directly adjacent to the solder and it would work just fine, but I want it this way just for unity's sake. This is going to allow me to put a bunch more machines here if I do it this way. So I'm just going to put the patterns back in that we had already made. And unfortunately we still have to use 2 crafters because this is just slightly more than 1 crafter can hold. But now that is literally all of the automation we have to do. Well, actually no, we do have to place an importer, and this importer does have to go on the bottom side of the solder, or whatever you're outputting the items with. It has to go on the bottom side of the solder or else it will not work, so keep that in mind. And then we can just hook up these with some cable, and it is completely set up. So that is pretty sweet, but there are also some other perks with this new update. So let's go ahead and craft a couple of these improved processors. Well, not that many. So whenever we craft those, we can see that multiple items actually go into the solder at once. Before, it would go one at a time. It would have to solder the whole thing, then put another one in. But now, Refined Storage is able to do sort of batch crafting, multi-processor crafting, multi-core crafting, I don't know what it's called. But for instance, if we were to just make a ton of planks, like a stack of planks, it's actually going to do that instantly, instead of us having to wait. So it's way faster. It can do multiple crafting recipes at once, so that makes everything go way quicker, and it also makes it way smaller. But now let's actually get to some of this Mekanism auto crafting here. So I'm going to place down a crafter with a chest in front of it, pretty standard stuff. And then we will just extract from this chest, and then that will go into this metallurgic infuser. But we are going to have to input into 2 separate slots, so I'm just going to run the conduit kind of to either side here. And then we'll set these sides to insert both. We'll set this to extract always active, and we'll make those on the green channels still. I'm actually going to switch this one down to the brown channel just so these don't interfere in the future. And then we'll set this to extract on the red channel, and we'll set that to always active as well. And then we have to set the actual outputs on the metallurgic infuser. So the red slot is fine on the left side. We'll change this side to the purple side. So those correspond to these 2 slots. This is the little buffer slot where you put redstone and stuff, and this is where you put the main ingredient. And then we'll set the blue output side to the back, which is what this slot is, and we'll take that one out there. And so now it'll insert into either of those, and it'll extract from the back here. And the metallurgic infuser is actually pretty intelligent. It'll put the correct item in the correct slot, so we don't have to worry about filtering all those items. So now I have to go through and actually program all the patterns, which means I have to go and make all the items I want to actually encode. So the first thing we're going to do is some basic control circuits. So if we just pop that into this crafter, theoretically we should now be able to make some control circuits. Actually, no, that's a lie. We need to connect that up first. Now we should be able to make some control circuits. So let's just try and craft 2 of those for now. You'll see that the redstone and stuff should go into the correct slots. It did, which is just beautiful. I'm going to make some Enriched Alloy. And then I want to teach it how to make some steel, which is a multi-step process actually. So first we need this enriched iron with a piece of coal and an iron ingot. And then that same enriched iron and another piece of coal will give us steel dust. But to actually turn this steel dust into steel, we're going to need to smelt that in a furnace. So I'm going to go ahead and make a powered furnace from actually additions. And I will set that down. And then we're going to have to set up another crafter for that one. So I'll place another crafter down and place down a chest. And that's a spruce chest, so these two don't connect. Then I'll just hook this up really basic. We'll tell this one to extract on the blue channel and this one to insert on the blue channel. And once I give that some power, I should then be able to put in my steel dust and that'll smelt up there. Then I can encode that pattern and put that into this crafter, and that should do its thing. And this powered furnace can obviously smelt 2 items at a time, and you can turn auto split on. So if you put a few items in there, it'll split it up automatically to make it more efficient. So I think that's all the stuff I want to auto craft, but I do need to now insert those items into my system after they're all crafted up. So we're just going to set down a modular storage, and we're just going to set this to our link ID, our input link ID, and we'll tell this to insert on the red channel, and then this one is already extracting on the red channel, and then we'll set this to in-out mode and extract on the red channel as well. And so once the items get output, they'll get put into this modular storage, and that one is our input modular storage for our refined storage, so it'll end up right in here. So now that we can actually autocraft with this metallurgic infuser, let's actually request some items. Let's make one more control circuit here. And now that that's done, we can go ahead and craft some steel as well. So we're gonna need 7 more steel. And I believe all that is now done, so we can get to crafting here. So the first thing we're gonna get is an Energized Smelter. And Mekanism and JEI are not exactly synced up right now, so it just shows all of the Mekanism machine crafting whenever you only want one. So it's really annoying to actually craft anything in this mod, but I think we should be able to get it. So we're gonna make a couple steel casings, and then we can make our Energized Smelter. There we go. We will grab that, and then the second thing we're going to need is an Enrichment Chamber. Now these two machines are going to allow us to do ore doubling. So let's just take it one step at a time and set that up now. So I'm going to set down this power cell again. I got rid of all the other machinery because we don't really need it anymore. So if we place down our Enrichment Chamber as well as our Energized Smelter, we can go ahead and set the outputs for these. Well, actually, we don't really have to do anything for the output. It's pretty much set up how we want it, but we do want to turn auto eject on, and that'll make it so it automatically ejects to this side here. And this one we do actually need to change the input to the left side, and we can get rid of that. Also, we can get rid of the energy. It just bothers me having it there, and it's completely not necessary. So let's throw in some silver and we can kind of see how this works. So the Enrichment Chamber is going to do, you know, what most ore doubling does. It's going to turn one ore into a couple, I don't know what they're actually called, dusts. It's just going to turn into a couple dusts, which are going to get smelted up. And we can hear the nice hum of the Energized Smelter. This thing might have the worst sound in the entire game, but you can see that is going to ore double just fine. And I actually think we're going to want some upgrades for these machines here, so I'm going to make a bunch of steel dust so we can make some upgrades. And I already made a bunch of this Enriched Alloy, so we can go ahead and make some now. Let's make a bunch of these energy upgrades, and we will also make a few speed upgrades, but we're not going to be using too many of these right now. Mainly I think we're going to be using the energy upgrades, because these energy upgrades are going to significantly reduce the amount of energy needed. And it will also increase the internal buffer of any machine we put them in. And so we can put a max of 8 energy upgrades in there, and we may as well because they're not that hard to make. And now instead of 20 RF per tick, we're using 2 RF per tick, so it cuts it to 1/10 of the energy it was using. And so that means if we put some speed upgrades in, we can speed up our machines, and this will also increase the amount of energy we're using. So now we're up to 6 RF per tick, but that's hardly anything. So I'm actually going to put all these in here now that we know that's not going to use that much RF still. Yeah, so we were able to put 4 speed upgrades in and 8 energy upgrades, and now we're still only using 20 RF per tick, which is what we started with to begin with. And then finally, probably one of the most valuable upgrades anyone can ever make, the muffling upgrade. So these machines can take up to 4 muffling upgrades, and they will quiet the sound a little bit for each upgrade you put in there. So we can finally enjoy a little bit of peace while our machines are running. And also thinking about it, we're going to need a lot of those upgrades, so I think it'd be really good if we auto-crafted those. So we're going to make some regular patterns for these because they're just regular crafting recipes. So here's the energy upgrade, and then the speed upgrade is just like it, but with a bit of osmium dust instead. And so I made another crafter we can put down right here, and we can put those patterns in, but we're also going to need patterns for osmium and gold dust, so we can make those automatically. And I also forgot to make the muffling upgrade as well. So I'm going to make a couple of these crushers, then we're going to turn that into a double crusher from actually additions. And then we're just pretty much going to do the same setup, crafter into a chest, and then that will lead into the crusher. And we will tell this one to extract on the purple channel, so none of these items go into any of these machines over here, and then it'll insert and extract on here, insert on the purple and extract on the red, always active. So then all that will just go into our input module, and then all that's left to do is just encode the pattern. So 1 gold will give us 1 gold dust, and then 1 osmium will give us 1 osmium dust. And we already know how to make steel dust, so we don't actually have to worry about that. That goes in our metallurgic infuser. And then while I'm on a roll, that recipe also uses a bit of glass, so we are going to encode a glass pattern and put that in our furnace crafter here. And so now we should be able to request upgrades, and it looks like we can. So we want to make 16 energy upgrades, so that should do its thing, and it should craft up the glass that it needs and everything like that. And a little while later we get our energy upgrades, and I want to make the energy upgrades first so we can go ahead and upgrade the machines in this house. I'm going to prioritize the energy upgrades because I definitely want to be as efficient as possible. I think energy is a good thing to focus on, and then we'll worry about the speed of all these machines a bit later. But I think now that we've gotten that done, it's about time we get to the 3 times ore processing. But of course, we're going to need to craft up a few more things here. So the first machine we need is a Purification Chamber, but we're going to need some of these advanced control circuits, which are made a bit like that. And we're also going to have to make another Enrichment Chamber, which we will then turn into a Purification Chamber. And then once the Purification Chamber does its stuff, we want that to output into a crusher. And then once the Purification Chamber does its stuff, we want that to output into a crusher, so we'll make 1 of those. But this Purification Chamber actually needs oxygen in order to purify ores, so we're gonna have to get our Electrolytic Separator we made a few episodes back. And if you'll remember, the Electrolytic Separator separates water into hydrogen and oxygen, so that means we're gonna have to supply it with some water, and I'm going to make an infinite water source from pressure pipes in order to do that. And the infinite water source is really similar to the reservoir we were using before, except we don't have to wait for it to fill up. It's pretty quick, and it's only 1 block in size. So let's hook up that water to this Electrolytic Separator, and this already has some stuff in it from before, but you can see water gets turned into hydrogen and oxygen. So we will hook up a bit of power to that to keep that going, and then we can set down our Purification Chamber and crusher. So the Purification Chamber is going to output to the right, and we'll turn auto eject on there, and then this will input from the left from the Purification Chamber, and we'll turn auto eject on, because that'll output to the right, which will go into our Enrichment Chamber. So these 2 blocks are the triple ore processing that then just gets led into our double ore processing. So now the only thing left to do to get this up and running is to get some oxygen into this Purification Chamber here. And we could definitely really simply just run a cable right into this Enrichment Chamber, and it would work fine, but I want to do a bit more of an elegant solution for that wiring. And so to do that, we are going to use some Phantomfaces from actually additions, but we're going to need some empowered diamantine crystal. So if we put a piece of diamantine in the middle, a bit of clay, 2 balls of clay, and then we put down some light blue dye, that should empower up, hopefully. And actually, word on the street is we don't need to actually filter the outputs of these empowers because they do not actually extract the input items. And that should now be all 4 of our diamantine crystals, and it is. So now we can come in and we can make a couple of blocks of ender pearl, and we can also make a couple of Phantomfaces here. And it took me freaking forever to get all the ender pearls we needed for this, because we also need a phantom connector, because much like our laser relays, we have to kind of hook them up. So this is sort of the wrench of the phantom faces. So let's look at how these Phantomfaces actually work. So let's set one down on the ground somewhere, and then we can set down any sort of inventory nearby. Now these Phantomfaces have a range of 16, but these are extendable by placing some phantom boosters on top. But honestly, that's not really necessary. We don't need more than 16 blocks of space. But now all we have to do is go ahead and connect these up. So we shift right click to store a block, and then shift right click on the Phantom Face, and that'll connect it. Now the Phantom Faces are going to essentially emulate whatever block they're connected to. So this Phantom Face is going to emulate this chest. So that means if we place down a hopper and we put blocks into this hopper, they'll go into this chest. And that's because this Phantom Face is essentially just acting like this chest. And so that also means we can extract items from this chest or whatever else we want to do with this chest. And so that's really useful for rooms like these, where we don't want to be running conduits and cables here and there. It cleans up wiring really nicely. So let's place down a phantom face right next to this enrichment chamber, and we're going to hook that up to our electrolytic separator. So now this phantom face is emulating this electrolytic separator. Now I should mention that there are multiple types of phantom faces. For instance, there's energy, liquid, and it might seem like we want a liquid phantom face because there's like an internal tank. It seems like we want to be manipulating liquids, but actually these two are considered gases, which are completely separate from the liquid system. It's kind of Mekanism's own system. And also because they're considered gases, we can only transport them using these basic pressurized tubes or whatever pressurized tube. So we have to use Mekanism piping. And that's one of the reasons it's kind of annoying. I didn't want to run these pipes all around because they don't fit on the same block like these Ender IO conduits do. So we can hook these up to this enrichment chamber now. And it's important to remember that this phantom face, I know I've said it before, but it's emulating this electrolytic separator. So that means all of the input and output sides, which are very specific on the electrolytic separator, are going to be the same on this phantom face. So on the electrolytic separator, the hydrogen is going to come out of the left side and the oxygen is going to come out of the right side. And we gotta remember it's placed facing this way. So we should also look at our phantom face from this direction. So this side is the front side we're looking at. So the left side will be where the hydrogen is coming from. Then the right side will be where the oxygen is coming from. Now, theoretically, that should work, but we actually do need to set this to output from this phantom face. Normally, if you set down a tube right next to this electrolytic separator, it just kind of goes right into the tube. But because we're using a phantom face, it looks like we do actually need to set the extraction on that. And to do that, we're going to need kind of the wrench of Mekanism, which is the configurator. So we can pop that in there, and you can't shift click in the energy tablet. So now we need to charge this up with a bit of RF here. And now we should be able to come back around, and if we shift right click on this conduit, we can change the mode. So right now it's push, but we want to set that to pull, and now you can see this conduit filling up with oxygen, and then we'll just set this to push just for good measure. And so now our purification chamber is filled up with oxygen, so if we put in a bit of iron there, that'll start doing its thing. And so that electrolytic separator made 3 iron clumps, which went into the crusher, and it looks like we need to actually set the input side of this machine. So those clumps will get crushed down into dirty iron dust, which will get enriched into regular iron dust, which will then get smelted into iron ingots. So those 3 clumps get turned into 3 ingots, so that's 3 ingots per ore. So right there we have ore tripling completely done. I think it's time we go to the final stage and go to the quadruple ore processing, but that process is even more involved than the triple was. So the machine we are going to need is a chemical injection chamber, but this is kind of a complicated recipe. So we're gonna need some diamond dust, which I'm just going to crush the diamonds up inside of this crusher for. And then if we take that diamond dust and put it in the metallurgic infuser and then put in an enriched alloy, we should get reinforced alloy. So we're gonna make 8 of those now. So then we can make a couple of these advanced control circuits, which we can then turn into elite control circuits using this reinforced alloy. And now we should be able to make it. And I also needed another purification chamber, which required another enrichment chamber. This recipe is awful, and actually I only have 87 iron left. We've used a lot of iron on this project, but hopefully it'll be worth it in the long run. And just like the purification chamber, we're going to need to feed this chemical injection chamber a certain chemical, but for that we're going to need another electrolytic separator, and we're also going to need to mix multiple chemicals into one, so we're going to get a chemical infuser so we can infuse those together. So now let's come into our little house here, and we will set down our chemical injection chamber, and then we'll place our electrolytic separator down, and we will also place our chemical infuser right between these two. That's going to automatically dump all the hydrogen that is made in this electrolytic separator with the water into the right side of this chemical infuser. But the chemical we're looking for is hydrogen chloride, so we're gonna have to get chlorine somehow. And the only way to get chlorine is by putting brine into an electrolytic separator. And the way we get brine is actually pretty involved as well. So we are going to need to make a whole new multi-block. We're going to need to make the thermal evaporation chamber. So we're going to need a ton of these thermal evaporation blocks. We're going to make a couple of these thermal evaporation valves. And then we're also going to need a thermal evaporation controller. And then also we're going to start making some solar power here. So first we're going to need these basic solar generators here. So we will just make 4 of those. And then using 4 of those solar generators, we can combine those to make an advanced solar generator. And we're actually going to get 4 of these solar generators, and I'm kind of regretting doing this. If we take a look at the iron situation, yeah, we got 3 iron left. I went down and I mined some iron. I'm ore tripling those. I only got like 10 pieces of iron though. So those are doing their thing. So we need to get this set up quick so I can get this quarry back up and running. But there are a couple more things we are going to need. We're going to need some spot loaders, so that takes a lot of ender pearls, but we get a ton of spot loaders. And spot loaders are essentially just chunk loaders, but they'll only load 1 chunk. And then we're also going to make a couple of ender tanks, but I'm going to make sure to make those with brown wool so they end up brown, 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 so we can save a little bit of dye. Then we're going to grab this drum, and we're going to go off into the desert. So, as I said, the thermal evaporation plant, or chamber, whatever it's called, is a multi-block structure, so we're going to go ahead and place down a ring of blocks. And I'm going to put this in the ground because this structure is going to get really, really tall, so I want to go downwards instead of making a massive tower. Alright, we're going to place another ring of blocks above this, and we're going to make sure the ring is 4x4, so a 2x2 hollow inside. And then we're going to place down our valves on this level, I believe, and you can place the valves anywhere in the multi-block structure, as long as they are within the rings. Alright, then let's go down and place our base layer here. So we will fill that in, and that will be our bottom. Then on the topmost layer, we have to place the controller. The controller can't go anywhere else but the topmost layer. So now if we fill in the top layer, well, I actually didn't make enough blocks to fill in the top layer, but that's why we made these advanced solar generators. So we can place these down in the corners now. So 1 in each corner will allow this multi-block structure to form, and the particles will go off, showing us that we did it correctly. And so the controller will turn on, and heat will start building up in this little bar here. Now these solar generators are actually completely optional. I could have just filled in these corners with these evaporation blocks and it would have worked just fine. The thing is, this temperature would not have risen, and you'll see why the temperature is important in a second here. But we're going to place down our infinite water source in our drum, and we're going to feed water into this. So we'll set this to insert, and we'll set this to extract, always active. And once we feed water into that, this will start producing brine. And so I'm actually going to put on multiple cables here, and I'm doing that just to make sure there is a sufficient amount of water going into this controller, or this chamber rather, because the higher this heat goes, the faster it's going to produce brine. So you'll see now as it's turning night, the temperature is going down, and that's because these solar generators are not going to work at night. So the heat's going down and the production is going down. So you can see it going down from the 7 we had it before, and it's going to keep going down to 0 now that it's full. But we can actually extract right into this drum here. So during the day, this thing will be at peak efficiency, and because we have the solar generators, it's going to work even faster than if we didn't. And the reason we're doing this in the desert is because there is a biome multiplier. So actually we're producing, I think, twice as much brine as we would in any other biome. So if we were to put it in, you know, the plains or whatever, we wouldn't be getting nearly as much. So now let's actually extract this out into our ender tank. So we will set that on extract. So this is completely set it and forget it. We don't actually have to come back here ever again. All we need to do is just set down a spot loader in this chunk, and I made sure this was all within 1 chunk here. And now this will constantly produce brine whenever we need it and put it into our ender tank. And back behind this electrolytic separator, we will go ahead and set up our ender tank similarly to how we set up our infinite water source. So we'll just run this brine, which we're going to extract, always active, right into this electrolytic separator. And now whenever we give this some power, that's going to start doing its thing. So this is now full of brine. We're going to dump this excess sodium because sodium is literally used for nothing in this mod. But the hydrogen from the left side of this electrolytic separator and the chlorine from the right side of this are both going to combine together to make that hydrogen chloride we need. So the only thing left to do now is actually get that hydrogen chloride into this chemical injection chamber. So we're going to use another phantom face for that because I like my phantom faces. So we can connect up this chemical infuser to this phantom face, and that's going to emulate that block. And so right now we're facing the front, and the output of the chemical infuser, wherever the hydrogen chloride is actually going to come out, is the front. So we want to pull straight out of this side. The problem is that these conduits are going to link up if we were to do that, and then instead of getting hydrogen chloride, this would get oxygen. But actually these Mekanism machines have multi-part support, so if we place down a little plane of chisels and bits here, we can go ahead and break that, and if we place that now onto this block, we can still place a conduit on this block, and they will not connect. But now all we have to do is just take our configurator and tell this to, well, we gotta shift right click, and tell this to pull, and then tell that to push, and now that'll fill up with hydrogen chloride, which is awesome. And now the job should be done. So if we put in some gold into this chemical injection chamber and also set the auto eject on, that chemical injection chamber is going to make 4 gold shards. And then if we set this to input, those shards will get purified, and after the purification, we're going to get some clumps, and that's going to work the same way. Those clumps will get turned into the dirty dust, which will get turned into the clean dust, which gets turned into ingots. So the 4 times just gets inserted into the regular old 3 times, and it goes down the line. So at the end of the line here, we will set the output side to the back side, which is that slot there, and then we can just extract right into our input module, and those will get inserted into our system after they've been processed into ingots. And then I'm also going to set up a chest with an exporter on it here, so we can pull in the ores from our system. So we will just run this cable I already have from our refined storage system up here. We'll place down a chest with an exporter on it, and in here we will whitelist all the ores we want to get processed, but right now I only have gold to actually whitelist, but eventually we'll get all the other ones we need. And then we're just going to set up a conduit right here, and then up top we will insert, and we'll make sure to set the input on the bottom of this machine. So now if we were to come in and put some gold ore into our system, that should get extracted and start getting processed, which it did perfectly. And it looks like everything is working fine, however noisy it is, but I actually need more materials in order to get upgrades to silence these machines. So we need to go and set up our quarry again. And we are back in the nether, and we can see the aftermath of our quarry here. So this is the area that we dug out. I just kind of let it run, and eventually it ran out of mana because I did not come back and refill it. I did refill it a couple times, but I did finally just let it run out. So I went all the way to this point right here, which is pretty good. This right here is right outside of the loaded chunks we have, so it was decent timing. And yeah, it's actually really easy to set back up. So all we have to do is just come back to the beginning corner of our quarry, and we're just going to set back down our block, and we're going to make sure this block is on Y level 54. Yep, okay, good. So now all we have to do is just link that block we just placed back up with this force relay over here. And there we go, it should be linked up. And I actually went ahead and made sure to get rid of all the blocks that would have been obstructing the quarry here. So like these big pillars where it couldn't mine the cobalt, so it didn't mine anything under it, I went ahead and mined the blocks under that so that block wouldn't get stopped. Because if it does get stopped, stuff like this is going to happen. When I first placed the block, I obviously did not place it high enough, so it got stuck on one of the hills in here and it just started doing some weird stuff. But I did fix it, so it went in the normal cube after that, but I just want to make sure that doesn't happen again. But now all we should have to do is come over and put back on these bore lenses here. And once we do that, that should do its thing, and we have a completely flat area that is going to just mine out again. And this is the nice thing about this quarry, we actually never have to rebuild this thing. We can keep this here and put the actual place where it digs pretty far away, and the metaverse will just teleport right to it. So this is permanent, we don't have to break this, we can just move that block. And it looks as if everything is working very nicely, everything's getting put into the range collector and then into our little input chest, which then goes into our refined storage system, so that is absolutely perfect. So now all we need to do is just set the input and output for all of our machines using some exporters and importers and whatnot, and everything should be good to go. Oh, and also I'm going to make some upgrades for these machines. So I've got the last of the upgrades here. So I've already gotten all 8 energy upgrades we can put in these machines, and I'm going to put 4 speed upgrades in each one of these. But that is excluding this chemical injection chamber because these work more slowly, because I have to do 4 times the work because this creates 4 items. And then in these 2 that are actually using up gases, we're going to go ahead and put in these gas upgrades, and that'll make those be more efficient when using up gas, so to use a lot less gas. Because whenever we put in the speed upgrades, it starts using a ton more gas, so we need those to offset that. And I actually forgot to make energy upgrades for a couple of these machines. We're going to put that in the chemical injection chamber as well as the chemical infuser. And we can actually put energy upgrades in the electrolytic separator. The only thing it does is it increases the internal buffer, but not the energy used, so I don't really need that. And so this seems to be just about the max amount of upgrades we can use with how much gas we're using essentially is our bottleneck. But whenever you put energy upgrades in these, they go up to 320 RF per tick, which is kind of a lot. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable doing that. that. But everything is working. We are ore quintupling still, which is awesome. But I think this is where I'm going to leave you guys for this episode. We got quite a bit done in this episode. Ore quadrupling, not bad. This will be very useful in the future. But thank you guys so much for watching my videos. If you made it this far, you are a champion. And I will see you all next time. Goodbye.
Yo, straight from the depths of Queens, leave you sleeping on the mezzanine. Like you Lincoln, then switch it to a desert scene. Often heard, but this motherfucker seldom seen. I'm throwing blows while you waiting for the bell to ring. Drug smoking, razors make the pasta sweet. Slumped over when the barrel and your posture meet. Stay lean like some motherfucking ostrich meat. You full of shit, it's time to get a colonoscopy.